techniques you use in real-life situations, how much do you rely on your traditional training, and or do you?
Well, if you can call my command of the English language traditional, then you can call my command of the martial arts language traditional. Because I have never been anything but a traditional martial artist, having spent a major portion of my life in Asia training, not the local YMCA.
If we relied on any prison officer's mentality, we wouldn't have discovered the Isle of Man yet. Give you an example. John and were in my class at school. He's an SO at Leeds, Nick. So I get discharged from prison Christmas Eve 1984. Signs me the papers, puts my record away and wishes me a bit of luck, like the way I've gone. I'm back in the Nick May the 10th, 1985. And in that time, all these pumps have trod on French soil, Syrian soil, Indian soil, Malayan soil, Singapore soil, and Russian soil. Just me pumps.
6'3", 16 stone with a hair-trigger temper. Please make no mistake, in his prime, Wakefield boxer and hardman Paul Sykes was a fighting machine. If you were a bouncer and he was in the mood to torment, engaging with him was a thankless and dangerous task. He knocked many hardmen out on the street and terrorised both screws and prisoners behind bars. In 1981, after a short run in the professional boxing arena, he was jailed for 5 years for 2 grievous bodily harms and the brutal attack on a police dog. The Alsatian was left with a broken jaw and snapped legs. It was a ruthless act and demonstrated just how lethal Sykes could be when cornered. In his summing up, the judge claimed Paul Sykes was a hitman for hire, who was paid £1,000 by a Blackpool factory boss to seriously injure a union official who had organised strikes at the man's business. Sykes and an accomplice lay in wait at the man's house, and the boxer savagely lashed an iron bar into the man's skull. As he crumpled to the floor, he stamped and beat him, breaking his leg in the process. According to news reports, Sykes had lost his £1,000 purse after betting on himself to beat tough Londoner and British champion John L. Gardner in 1979. It was after this fight and a subsequent loss that he was short of money and reverted back to violent criminality. Gary Spiers, born around 1943 in New Zealand, was a formidable figure in martial arts and the door industry. Growing up as one of only 7 Maori heritage kids in his school, he learned to defend himself early on. Starting with wrestling, Spiers moved on to judo and later discovered karate, which he pursued passionately, despite the limited options in New Zealand at the time. After relocating to Australia in the early 60s, Spiers trained in Okinawan Shorei karate and took up door work at Melbourne's clubs. His towering 6 foot, 240-pound frame made him perfect for handling rough situations, and he soon gained a reputation as a skilled and fearless doorman, surviving multiple stabbings and becoming a legend in Australia's door scene. On one occasion, when head doorman at a notorious club in Melbourne, he was attacked after finishing work in a restaurant by 2 soldiers. He had earlier refused to let them into the club. It was a bloody and brutal fight, with Spiers suffering savage injuries to the head and one of the soldiers having his ear chewed off. Despite being smashed with a stool, Spiers threw the other one through a plate glass window off the second floor, a claim he denied, and said the man ran through it in fear, trying to get away from him when questioned by police. Spiers furthered his karate in Japan, earning the nickname Kuma-san, Mr. Bear, due to his size and skill. After training with some of the world's best fighters, he moved to England, where his friend, Terry O'Neill, helped him find door work in Liverpool. There, he established a dojo, teaching a practical version of karate, rooted in his door work experiences. By 1984, December, Paul Sykes had served his sentence and was released back into the community. Whilst inside, he had smashed the weights and terrorised staff who upset him, and it was fair to say he was far from a reformed character. Gary Spiers had been far more productive and established many venues under his growing security firm across Liverpool, Southport and Blackpool. Spiers had developed a brand of martial arts called applied karate, which he taught aspiring doormen and people looking to defend themselves. The philosophy behind applied karate was to morph traditional martial arts with practical fighting techniques to deal with real-life scenarios. This ingenious move established hundreds of loyal combat-ready students that Spiers could employ in his various establishments.
He wound up there, and I had used my boots to finish him off his colleague would not have been a threat to me in any shape or form. But I climbed onto him, and it altered my whole life. I was a legal fugitive in Asia and Europe for 12 years as a result. Now that's one reason.
Sykes, who struggled with a lifelong dependence on alcohol, was once again short on funds upon his release and needed money to sustain his marathon drinking sessions. It was a difficult period in his life. Any aspirations to rekindle a boxing career were gone, hindered by his age and an abrasive personality that clashed with anyone unwilling to yield to his domineering ways. He had a long-standing connection with Blackpool, where he had met his first wife, Pauline, a woman he was deeply infatuated with, and with whom he had his first child. During his time in Blackpool, Sykes worked as a lifeguard and as a minder for various shops. He quickly built a reputation as a hardman for hire, a status that ultimately led to his downfall when he accepted a contract that resulted in his imprisonment in 1981 for assaulting a shop steward. According to a source whose father was a known petty criminal from Lancashire and a drinking companion of Sykes, Sykes and his associate were hired to deliver some rough justice to a large Australian who had started taking over lucrative contracts in Blackpool, upsetting several key figures in the city. Late one spring night, Spiers was locking up an establishment he'd been hired to protect. The popular seaside resort was gearing up for the summer invasion, and it was all hands on deck. By this point, Spiers had built a solid portfolio of venues to secure across Blackpool, Southport, Liverpool, and Wales. He was also debt collecting in London and had a following of students learning his brand of applied karate. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a man approaching and turned to face him. The man, small in stature and build, spoke with a Lancashire accent. Extending his hand in greeting, he asked if Spiers ran the security, implying he was inquiring about work. He seemed friendly and non-threatening, and perhaps due to tiredness and not being fully on alert, Spiers extended his large hand to shake, just as he sensed a presence on his right side. As he turned his head, a metal bar came swooping down. Instinctively, Spiers twisted, taking the blow on his massive shoulder, and the bar darted off into the night. Instantly, a flash of pain surged through Spiers, sparking him into action. He had been in dangerous situations and thousands of fights, both legally and on the streets worldwide. His body responded instinctively to the threat. The man who had approached him simultaneously rushed in, while his accomplice struck from the side. Moments later, he was staggering around the street, clutching his eyes and screaming that he was blind. Two sausage-like fingers had pierced directly into his eyeballs. The attacker wielding the iron bar, shocked that it hadn't landed squarely on Spiers' head, had momentarily stepped back, fumbling as it flew from his grip. He tried to throw a vicious left hook, but Spiers rammed his bull-like head into the man's face, crunching his nose. In a panic, reeling from the force of the headbutt, the man attempted to grip Spiers in a headlock, but the animal within Spiers was now in full survival mode. He sank his teeth into the man's cheek, prompting a piercing scream, and, with almost superhuman strength, the attacker broke free, sprinting off into the night like a 100-meter runner. His partner in crime had already fled, clutching his eyes in agony, fearing for his sight. This explosive burst of violence had been over in seconds, leaving Spiers to piece together what had happened in such a brazen attack. As he attempted to calm his breathing, he gingerly probed his shoulder, already aware it would feel worse once the adrenaline wore off. It had been an orchestrated attempt on his life by a pair of amateurs, yet it served as a stark reminder of the dangers of his chosen life, a life he had lived for decades. This was no profession for the shy or the meek. It was a warrior's path in a modern world. People will understandably be skeptical of this story. After all, there are countless tales of mythical encounters involving people beating up Sykes, or outrageous accounts of Spiers' exploits, both abroad and in the UK. It's often hard to separate truth from fiction, especially given how long ago these events took place. But here's why I believe this story has merit. The story was told to me by the son of a criminal associate of Sykes from the 1970s. The alleged attack occurred around 1984 or 1985, right as the season was kicking off in Blackpool. Some heavy individuals reportedly weren't too pleased with the big New Zealander, who they mistakenly thought was Australian. Now, I don't know exactly why they were angry with Gary, but it might have been that he'd beaten up one of their friends, or maybe it was a matter of territory or money. Whatever the reason, Sykes was supposedly approached and paid to carry out an attack on him. To dig deeper into this story, I first turned to news reports, looking to see if Sykes might have been in prison during that time. If he was locked up, I could dismiss the story as false. After a few hours of searching, I found that he had been jailed for a metal bar attack back in 1981. Now, I knew Sykes was a professional boxer, a pub fighter, and a notorious prison hardman, but I wasn't aware of the full extent of his criminal violence. As highlighted in this upload, a judge once even accused Sykes of being a hitman. He was, in fact, a violent armed robber with a history of paid attacks on people, and even altercations with the police. A very dangerous man. Not exactly a professional enforcer, it seemed he took on these reckless jobs due to financial struggles and to support his drinking habits. I then looked further to confirm his release date from that 1981 sentence. I rewatched a documentary that I referenced earlier, where Sykes states that he was released in December 1984 and didn't go back to prison until May 1985.
I get discharged from prison Christmas Eve 1984. Signs me the papers, puts my record away and wishes me a bit of luck, like the way I've gone. I'm back in the nick May the 10th, 1985. In that time, I won these pumps and trod on French soil, Syrian soil, Indian soil, Malayan soil, Singapore soil, and Russian soil. Just me pumps.
That was a jackpot moment. This timeline made the story more plausible, with him being out of prison and known for wielding an iron bar. The next step was to validate whether Spiers had any connection to Blackpool in 1985. I reached out to world champion karate expert Alfie Lewis, a close friend of Gary's, to see if Spiers had venues or interests around Blackpool at that time. Alfie confirmed that he did. Everything seemed to be adding up, making the story more believable. I then tried to see if anyone else had heard of this story, or if it had been referenced in articles or books on Spiers. There was an interview by Terry O'Neill in 1986 where he and Gary discussed several violent incidents. In it, Gary mentions a particularly dangerous situation where he was attacked by two men while closing down an arcade in Blackpool, around the same time as this supposed incident. He describes an attack by two men, one of whom attempted to hit him with an iron bar, a fight where he felt his life was truly on the line. For me, that was enough to believe this happened, but with a few caveats. I couldn't find anyone to independently verify it. Jamie Boyle, who's written extensively on Sykes, doesn't mention this in any of his books, nor does Sykes' own book, Sweet Agony. But that's not too surprising. Even Sykes might have chosen to keep this off the record. Secondly, Sykes claimed in a video that he was travelling the world at that time, though those claims seem rather fanciful. It's possible he said that to distance himself from the incident. To know the absolute truth, I'd need either to have been there or to know someone directly involved. I can't do that, so this story, like many others involving Sykes and Spiers, should be taken with a healthy dose of scepticism. But for what it's worth, I think it has merit, and the source I spoke to seemed genuine. Plus, the timeline aligns. Let me know what you think. If anyone else has heard of this attack or has more details, I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Another interesting story I came across while researching the encounter between Sykes and Spiers involved a separate violent incident, this time between Sykes and the legendary Blackpool figure, Michael Mitzi Walsh, known as the Governor of Blackpool. Mitzi arrived in Blackpool after serving time for assaulting 6 policemen. He did his sentence at Dartmoor Prison in the southwest, where he crossed paths with Eric Mason, a friend of the notorious Cray brothers. The two struck up a friendship, and as Mitzi established himself as the top man in Blackpool, he maintained close ties with Mason. There's a rumour that Mitzi once ran the Crays out of Blackpool, though this sounds like one of those folklore tales that circulated through many northern cities after the twins were locked up. One story I heard in passing during an interview Jamie Boyle did with a friend of Paul Sykes involved Mitzi reportedly shoving a gun in Sykes' mouth. Boyle didn't go into further detail on that incident, but I found it intriguing.
Right, and obviously, was his name really big in Blackpool then? Was he active?
Blackpool was run by Mitzi Walsh. Mitzi was the godfather in Blackpool. He was the Cray twins of Blackpool.
Yeah.
And when Paul came over, to be fair to Paul, he used to run with Ronnie Trelly. I mean, he fucking killed a police dog once. Police dog went for him and he just splayed its legs, you know. German Shepherd.
Yeah.
Jumped up at him and he just grabbed its legs and split it, killed its own dead in 1 second.
Paul Sykes did?
Yeah.
Right. And did Paul have had any issues with this Mitzi Walsh?
Oh, yeah, fucking Mitzi had a gun in his mouth.
Right.
It's a long story. I'll tell you that one at another time, but it's a longer story, that.
And if you could sum Paul Sykes...
By the way, Paul Sykes was fearless. Nobody frightened Paul Sykes. Nobody. Nobody on the planet frightened him.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you're a member of any true crime groups, feel free to share the video. Until next time, thank you for watching.